we've gotten a lot of literature from NBC calling it a semi-autobiographical comedy. Just how much is it really your story, and where did you want to draw the line between I need to make him a character versus...
Well, I mean, it's very autobiographical in the sense that I am an American living in Sweden, and I moved there for love and kind of moved there fairly impulsively and hadn't really thought it all through. And a lot of the situations are, from my own life.
Okay.
But I mean, I don't think anyone's life is interesting enough to support. Maybe.
I don't know. I mean, did you play around with iterations of it where it was closer to your life
yes,
rather
actually,
than...
we were thinking, there was a time where we were wondering whether I should actually be playing myself.
Right.
Since my sister's playing herself.
Right.
But no, I wasn't that interested in that. There's something fun about playing. I think he is a much more naive character and a little bit less aware of how he's being perceived.
Okay.
And I think there's more humor in that than
Yeah.
there would be if I was playing it totally straight.
Now,
Plus, I was acting.
well,
It's
I
called
mean,
acting.
you were. Not everybody does. So, I mean, that is nice. You wanted to challenge yourself
Yes,
a little
I
bit, right?
challenge myself. And, but the character's pretty close to me, so I'm not going to
Okay.
challenge myself too much.
Well, I mean, I feel like in a lot of ways, the character could be considered similar to you just for the fact that he's taking himself out of his comfort zone, going to somewhere completely different. I mean, you're starting a career in Hollywood where you were doing something else for years. So what was it about this time in your life that you said, yes, I'm ready, I want to step in, I want to try this?
I don't know if I really thought about it. It's similar to the movie.
Okay,
It's
that's
very
fair.
Impulsive. I started doing stand-up in Stockholm a little over 2 years ago. And that was kind of the first step, I think, of this massive career change. I was a lawyer for 12 years. And that went really well, and it was something that I always kind of wanted to do and thought that I would be good at. And then once I did it and I succeeded at it, it was such a great feeling of personal kind of pride and joy. So then 2 years ago, when I sat up in my attic in Sweden and wrote the script for the show, and I wasn't really sure if anybody would ever read it or if it was possible. I mean, I wrote that I wanted it to be a show that was sold in Sweden and the U.S. and have a ton of American cameos and be a rom-com and be unlike anything on television and have myself as the lead actor. I wasn't sure if anybody was actually paying attention.
Right.
But I certainly dreamed very big that day, and the reality of it actually has exceeded the dreams. It's been crazy. Everything I wrote on that day happened. So I'm so appreciative of it, man. It's not. I know this is a once in a lifetime thing. Yeah, I mean, I always thought I could do it.
Was there something, though, that kept you from trying it earlier?
I just thought it was too big.
Okay.
I didn't think that. I thought that that acting or just the entertainment industry was something you kind of had to get into at an earlier age.
Okay.
And then I chose kind of a different path. And once you go down that road and you have a family and a job, it's for me, it just didn't even seem like a possibility to just be like, I think I'm going to start acting.
Right.
Family.
That's fair. Yeah.
It's like being an astronaut. It's something,
Well.
something that feels like it should take some time. You can't just jump right into it.
True.
But turns out it's not too late. It wasn't too late, at least. And I think living in Sweden helped in that sense. Because I think if I tried to do it in the U.S., if I developed a show in the U.S., I think people would have taken control over it.
Yeah.
I would have sold a script, and then Keanu Reeves would have been playing.
Well, I mean, you
The role
mentioned
of
it.
Bruce.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier. All the things that you wanted in the scripts, and that actually happens. That's very rare, I think,
Yeah.
even today.
Yeah. But I think the Swedish angle kind of two things. The Swedish angle made it more likely that I could do it because there was no one else really. There's no American really actors there.
That's
that
true.
could do it. And then my sister's name and connections. I mean, obviously, at least led people to believe that I might be able to do it. I got like a benefit of the doubt, I think,
Right.
because we have the same parents.
Do you feel like would that go into your decision when you said she has to play herself? She has to be in that first scene in the pilot with me, or was that a little bit less about trying to sell the show and just more about she's my sister, I want her in my show?
No, it was about trying to sell the show.
Okay. Okay.
To be honest. Yeah, I mean, she's in, I think, 4 or 5 episodes playing herself, and it's also just really kind of neat way, I think, to start a show is for us to be acting together. It's really, really fun to act with her. Unfortunately, I gave her all the funny lines in all of our scenes, which I didn't realize until when we were shooting here in LA, and I said to her, I was like, you know, I didn't write one funny line for me in any scene. She was like, yeah, I'm your older sister, so that's what we do. Yeah, so I think it was more, the cameo idea was always a way to, especially for the Swedish audience, was to try to make it just a little bit cooler.
Okay.
And more of an American show.
Okay.
But it was really fun to play around. I mean, since I'm playing a character and Amy's playing herself, I could write her as like a really horrible version of herself.
I mean, she didn't seem as horrible as she could have been.
She's just inept and can't do anything without Bruce.
That's true. That is true. You did make her very dependent on you.
She drinks tequila during the day.
Well, who doesn't? It's Hollywood. Did you know? I mean, you're talking about doing stand-up in Sweden and writing the show in Sweden. How much of the actual comedy, when you're writing jokes or when you're writing banter, are you concerned with how it plays for both audiences, or did you just write it and say, I don't necessarily care if everybody gets every joke?
No, we were always writing to try to find universal humor. We had Swedish writers and American writer, well, myself, I guess, one American writer, and it was important to us through that process because we did have the intention of it being sold in the U.S. and Sweden. So we wanted to find, whenever there was a joke that was too Swedish or too American that the other side didn't quite get, we just cut it.
Okay.
So of course the danger there is you could be left with just this kind of terrible, not funny product, but the goal was to find the universality of humor, and I think we did that. I think the reaction to the show, not just in Sweden and the U.S., but in other countries, is a lot that people can identify with. And I think because we avoided too specific form of comedy, we hopefully were able to do that.
Now you've seen some of the reaction, not necessarily U.S. reaction yet. What are you expecting from the reaction you've seen overseas? What are you expecting the audience in the U.S. to gravitate to the most?
I have no idea how it's going to do in the U.S., to be honest.
How do you want it to do? Like, what about it? What about the show do you want them to say? You know what? That's unlike something I've never seen, or that element I really.
When I pitched the show, I pitched it as a romantic comedy, and for me, romantic comedies are just usually the domain of movies.
Yeah.
With Drew Barrymore in
True.
everyone that I secretly watch on the back of airplanes and secretly enjoy and make sure nobody's watching as I'm watching it. So I really wanted to make a romantic comedy for TV, which I really hadn't seen much of before. Actually, when I was pitching the show in both Sweden and the U.S., all the network executives were like, "Give me a show. What's it like? It's like Swedish Friends, or?"
Gotcha.
And I couldn't really. I think I said like Moonlighting or something. Which
Okay.
I don't know. I'm just trying to think of like a show that has a continuing storyline. That's really a sweet, funny show. So I would love if people took that away from it. Really, we tried to make Bruce and Emma, the two main characters, really relatable and identifiable, and have them be so likable that the audience is really rooting for them. Which kind of forced us to pull back, I think, a bit on their humor tendencies. But I think there's a universality to the themes of the show that kind of speak to everyone. The fish out of water aspect, of course, and you don't have to live somewhere to feel like you're out of place.
True.
or that you have to reinvent yourself and start over. And I think the relationship aspect of it is really just trying to work through difficult situations that, again, people can identify with.
Okay. And what did you find the biggest challenge, that something maybe you weren't expecting, being that you wrote it and that you're acting in it? Were there moments hard to separate? That, you're on set and you're hard to get out of the writer's head, or is it, maybe a particular scene that harder to get into an emotion than you expected?
No doubt the hardest thing for me was I had a crying scene, and I was alone in a taxi with the cameraman outside, and the taxi was rolling, and then there was a walkie-talkie in the taxi, and the director said, "Okay, and tears."
Okay.
And that was the one moment where I realized, oh no, like, I'm pretty sure if I went to acting school, that's like a class, that's a day, the crying day.
I don't know about that, but okay.
I'm pretty sure they teach you how to cry, based on the actors that I've spoken with. That they all have like some sort of method, but I had nothing.
Okay.
So that was the most difficult.
But you wrote that for yourself. So what was it about it that you said, I need to challenge myself, and I need to not just be a straight guy playing myself?
I wanted the show to have some really sad and some sweet moments, and tonally to be different from anything. And that's, I don't know if that's going to work actually. In general, I think it's tricky to try to find that right balance when you're doing a comedy to have really emotional scenes. But I was so psyched. I mean, I reached way within and got some tears out, and then I started crying too much. Like I was kind of heaving, and then the walkie-talkie came out. Okay, little less tears. But that was a moment where I really felt like I became an actor.
Nice. So clearly the next project for you is going to be a serious drama.
Just crying. Just lots of crying. On Golden Pond too.
Nice. And I do have to ask, I thought Ileana Douglas and Patrick Ewing as your parents. Patrick Duffy, I always do that.
Yeah.
Patrick Duffy as your parents. Bobby Ewing, amazing casting, just great interaction. What went into finding them and saying, hey, these have to, they're the quintessential Americans?
Well, it's funny because almost everybody on the show has some relation to, almost all the cameos have some relation to Sweden.
Oh.
Will Ferrell has a Swedish wife, and so he's there in the summer. Aubrey Plaza had a Swedish exchange student boyfriend in high school.
Who knew?
My sister has me. Malin Ackerman is Swedish.
Right.
And
the guy from ABBA.
Yeah, he's very Swedish. Ileana Douglas did this IKEA web series, Easy to Assemble. And Patrick Duffy was, when we were casting the father, we made a list of people who were super famous in Sweden. And he is the top of that list. I mean, Dallas was, they only had one channel growing up, and Dallas was on it like 10 hours a day. So he is remarkably famous in Sweden. And so it was like him, and then it was Hasselhoff.
Oh.
And then it was Lorenzo Lamas. It's a really interesting group on the whiteboard. I can remember we were listing potential fathers. So happy and grateful that he said yes and came to Sweden.